Whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Think about such things.
It's clear. I would like to play just a part of a video that I came across. Would like to share with you. It fits right into the our talk about joy.
Thank you very much.
Hi, of course it's great still to be here, again to be here. And as the deacon said, today I will give my witness testimony, and as time allows, perhaps talk a little bit more about the relationship of Judaism to the Catholic Church, or maybe why, okay, I wasn't planning to start with preaching, but there's only one disadvantage that a cradle Catholic can conceivably have over a non-Catholic, which is the danger of being a cradle Catholic is not being aware of what you have that no one else has. And the advantage occasionally of being a convert is we as converts who come into the church from outside, it can be easier to see the infinite gift. Well, it's easy even for a Catholic to see the infinite gift of the church, but what's harder to see is how everybody else is dying of thirst in the desert, essentially, except a Catholic who understands the truths of the faith and who, let's hope, is at least occasionally in a state of grace. So I will give my witness testimony, but maybe I'll talk more about that. But the point of my witness testimony is, of course, is talking about that transition a little bit. Anyway, as I mentioned yesterday, I was born and raised quite Jewish. My parents were both German Jewish Holocaust refugees. They had both fled Hitler's Germany. And growing up, I grew up in the 50s, so it was pretty shortly after the war. Jews and Gentiles, at least in the United States, I grew up outside of New York City. That's why I'm speaking too fast. I'll slow down. But there was less mingling between Jews and Gentiles, and Jews and Christians. And growing up, all my friends were Jewish. All my parents' friends were Jewish. There wasn't really much interaction with Christians. I went to a secular school, but from the beginning of school into university, I also went to Jewish religious education after school. And so my entire identity was Jewish growing up, and the only way I could even conceive of God and religion was through Judaism. In my late high school years, I became even more fanatically Jewish, one might say. I became a follower of a Hasidic rabbi. You know the Hasids with the long black coats and the ear curls? And I kind of fell under the spell of a very charismatic Hasidic rabbi and followed in his train and went to Israel the summer between high school and college, following him around and being at his prayer meetings every night and so forth. And I even thought of not coming back to the United States to begin university that fall, but just staying in Israel and entering the closest thing Judaism has to religious life, which is a life of study and prayer in yeshiva, in this case in Jerusalem. It's a fairly monastic form of life. It's not exactly the same. But I didn't. I went back to the United States and I started university, which was MIT, which is a very technical, scientific, secular spirit university. And it's also a very prestigious university, so of course, everyone there thinks that they're the smartest people in the world and know more than anyone else. And it was under that spell of that environment, I essentially lost my Jewish faith. The view of the world there was that religion is just some kind of, medieval superstition that man came up with to explain things before there was science to, really give the true explanation. And I fell under the sway of that pseudo-scientific worldview that science has all the answers and religion is just myth. It's actually a pseudoscientific worldview. It's the opposite of scientific worldview. Because the essence of science is you start with the data, you start with the evidence, you develop a theory that can explain the evidence. If it successfully explains the evidence, you can hold on to that theory. And if it can't explain the evidence, you have to throw it away and come up with another theory. The truth is that all of the evidence points to the truths of the Catholic faith. You have tons and tons of materialistic, scientifically establishable evidence that supports Catholicism and that actually contradicts materialism. For instance, you have the Shroud of Turin. I think all of you know about the Shroud of Turin, Jesus' burial cloth. And even today, you know, in 2015, with all of our technology, all of the engineers and scientists in the world could not counterfeit the Shroud of Turin, you know, much less 800 years ago, whenever it first came to the surface. You have the Tilma of Guadalupe. Similarly, it's on this cactus fiber cloth that has a lifetime of 20 or 30 years, and it is completely, you know, undamaged and unworn after almost 500 years, and so forth. You have the miracles of Fatima, right? The sun spinning in the sky and crashing to Earth, which was seen by, you know, 80,000 or 100,000 people, including skeptics, including communists, including atheists, who had only gone there to laugh at these superstitious peasants who thought there'd be a miracle. You have the medical miracles at Lourdes and so forth and so on, right? You're all aware of that. But these, if one truly had a scientific worldview, one would have to say the theory of materialism fails because there's evidence to contradict it. Does this make sense? So anyway, but of course I didn't know this then. But it's a little bit of a digression, but you know, we live in this very scientifically oriented age. I think that God gave us these physical miracles, especially today, like the Shroud of Turin and so forth, in part as a means of evangelization. So it's a pretty, I think it's an effective means of evangelization. In other words, if somebody wants to be totally materialistic and claim that they're, you know, that the faith is all nonsense, they should be challenged. Okay, how do you explain this? How do you explain this? And actually, all they can do is throw away the evidence. Basically, and Émile Zola, who was a very big French writer at the turn of the 20th century, an atheist, he went to Lourdes to write a book debunking Lourdes, showing how it was all just, you know, imaginary. He went there. He saw tremendous physical miracles. There was a woman in the railway carriage going down with him whose face was eaten away by a cancer. And he saw her after she was healed, and she had a healthy face. Well, you know what his response was? Was to pension her off, I think it was in Belgium, for the rest of her life, so that nobody could see her. He wrote, "I don't care how many miracles I see, I refuse to believe them." So anyway, that's the position that that's the scientific position. That's not very scientific. But anyway, I lost my faith at MIT. I went on to Harvard Business School. I did well enough at Harvard Business School to be invited to join the faculty. I joined the faculty, and at the ripe old age of 29, I was a professor of marketing at Harvard Business School, which was pretty heady stuff. But that's when the bottom fell out of my world, because what had been going on all my life since I was a small child was I felt in my heart there has to be a real meaning and purpose to life, and someday when I'm older, I'll come to know the real meaning and purpose to life, which I thought would come from entering into a personal relationship with God, which I honestly thought would happen at my bar mitzvah. The bar mitzvah is like the Jewish version of confirmation. When the child is about 13, he goes through this ceremony in the synagogue and enters religious adulthood. And I honestly thought that at my bar mitzvah, the veil would drop and I would come into a personal relationship with God. And when that didn't happen, it was actually one of the saddest days of my childhood. But then pretty soon I decided the real meaning and purpose of life would come when I got a driver's license. Or when I left home, or when I started university, or if I got into Harvard Business School, and so forth. So I had for about 10 or 15 years these external objects that I thought would give my life real meaning. But here at the point I'm describing, when I was 29, I was already far more successful in a worldly sense than I ever expected to be, being a professor at Harvard Business School, but life still had no meaning or purpose. You know, we were just a chemical accident, some lightning hit some mud filled with amino acids, you know, 5 billion years ago, and here we are. There's no meaning or purpose to life. We live for 70 or 80 or 90 years and die, and that's it. There's no pattern to things that happen and so forth. So there was no point to anything despite the worldly success. But the difference being, at this point, there was nothing more I could look forward to that I could imagine would give life meaning, because, you know, there was no brass ring out there to still reach for. So I fell into the deepest despair of my life at that point, a kind of existential despair. And it was in that I was walking in nature early one morning, just lost in my thoughts. That's the only solace I found, would be to go to some beautiful place, you know, in the middle of nature. So I was just walking along, and I had long since, I mean, I was essentially an atheist at that point. I had long since given up on any idea of God or religion. And I received the most spectacular grace in my life. As I was walking along from one moment to the next, the curtain between earth and heaven disappeared, and I found myself in the presence of God, very knowingly in the presence of God, in a very intimate conversation with God, so to speak, seeing my life and experiencing my life as I would see it after I died and looked back over it in the presence of God. And I saw instantaneously, I saw how I would feel about everything after I died. I saw that my two greatest regrets when I died would be, number one, all of the time and energy I had wasted worrying about not being loved, when every moment of my existence I was held in an ocean of love, greater than I ever imagined could exist, coming from this all-knowing, all-loving God. And the other regret would be every hour I had wasted doing nothing of value in the eyes of heaven. I saw my life as though, all my life I had been greedily accumulating piles of Monopoly money, that brightly colored paper money from the game of Monopoly, when right next to it there was a stack of gold coins that I had been ignoring, which would be, of course, merit in heaven. I saw how foolish it was to be greedy for things that wouldn't be doing me any good at all, even 100 years hence, when I'm dead, whereas I could have been greedy, so to speak, to accumulate treasure in heaven, from which I would very literally be benefiting 100 million years from now. Now, I know this isn't the healthiest attitude in the world, but I was a Harvard Business School marketing professor, so I have an excuse. Everything was net present value, everything was maximizing returns, and I was still seeing this a little bit in that way. So I didn't see the error in being greedy, I just saw how stupidly greedy I had been. And if I want to be smart and greedy, the only thing that made sense would be to try to be as great a saint as possible, essentially. Another thing that I saw in this experience was how foolish I had been. I had basically spent my life sort of looking in the rearview mirror, saying to myself, if only that hadn't happened to me, then I would be happy today, or if only that hadn't happened to me, then I would be happy today. And nothing could be further from the truth, because everything that had ever happened to me had been the most perfectly designed thing that could come to meet me, coming from the hands of this all-knowing, all-loving God. Not only including those things that had caused the most suffering at the time, but especially those things that had caused the most suffering at the time. And of course, I saw that the meaning and purpose of my life was to worship and serve my Lord and God and Master who was revealing himself to me. Now, I will say one other thing. Probably the biggest single transformative aspect of this experience was just coming into the incredibly intimate knowledge that God not only knew me personally, not only knew my name, but had been watching over me and caring about me every moment of my existence from my conception, as though I were the only person he had ever created or ever would create. He not only knew and controlled everything that ever happened to me, but he knew how I felt at every moment of my life and cared about how I felt at every moment of my life. And in a fairly real way, was made happy by everything that made me happy, and was saddened with me by everything that made me sad. And it was coming into this understanding of how intimately God knew me and how intimately he loved me and cared about me every moment. That was by far the biggest transformative aspect of this. Now, one might ask, didn't you know that as a Jew? Now, in all honesty, if you read the Old Testament, that is not the picture of God you get. You get a little of it in the prophets, but you don't get any of it in the Torah, in the first 5 books of the Old Testament. The picture you get of God is like the picture you see in Exodus, when God calls Moses up to the top of Mount Sinai to receive the 10 Commandments. He tells him, build a fence around the base of the mountain before you come up, because if anyone should even touch the base of the mountain while I'm on top, they will have to be instantly killed because of the sacrilege. So that's kind of the picture I had of God. Obviously this was not fitting in with that picture. So I prayed. I could not think of this God as the God of Judaism, as the God of the Old Testament. So as I was having this experience, I was actually still walking. It's a very curious, needless to say, state that I was in, because I still saw the physical world around me, the trees and the bushes and the insects, but I saw through it into the spiritual world. And the spiritual world was so much realer and so much more immediate and so much more concrete and substantial than the physical world that I wasn't surprised during this experience that I was seeing the spiritual world. The only thing I couldn't understand is how I could have ever not seen it, because it was so much more real than the physical world, which was like, a painted veil, a kind of gossamer veil that was simply shielding one's vision from the real world. I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but sometimes when you go to the theater or go to the ballet, you'll be in the audience and you'll be looking at the stage, and there'll be a curtain on the stage and the lights will be on, and you'll just see the front of the curtain. And then they will turn off the house lights and there'll be lights shining on the front of the curtain, and you'll still just see the curtain. But then they will dim those lights and turn on the stage lights, and all of a sudden you see through the curtain to the actors on the stage or the dancers on the stage, and you barely see the curtain anymore. And it was like that. It was like the physical world just became that, very thin veil behind which I saw the spiritual world. So I was walking along still, and I prayed to this God who was so incredibly present. Let me know your name so I know what religion to follow to worship and serve you properly. I don't mind if you're Buddha and I have to become a Buddhist. I don't mind if you're Krishna and I have to become Hindu. I don't mind if you're Apollo and I have to become a Roman pagan, as long as you're not Christ and I have to become Christian.
Okay. I know you might want to watch the rest, but you can do this at your own leisure. I think he's going to talk more about his experience. I listened to the whole thing, and it's really impressive. The experience that he, if we can dim those lights, I think it would be better. Any feedback from what you just watched? I think I could not articulate what he said, and I could never be in his place, because he saw a difference. He had an experience of being so deprived, yet very accomplished, achieved what we all conceive to be the top, an MIT grad, Harvard professor at age 29. It seems like he could have made all the money in the world if he wanted to. By the way, he stopped teaching, and he was evangelizing after that experience. Actually, it was a year from this experience, because as you heard, he still refuses to accept that this God that revealed himself to him was Jesus. And for one full year, without burning the whole thing for you, you still need to listen to him directly. He would say a prayer every night. So he's ambivalent. He wants that God, he enjoys that God, but in his mind, I just don't want him to be Christ. I'm just so against that Christ. And the one thing that struck me and made me think of it to be an appropriate video to share with you is that every stage in his life, and I think for us too, every stage in our life, we think that if I can just get to that point, I'll be happy. If I can just get into this school, that would be great. If I can just marry that person, that will be it. If I can buy that house, that will make me happy. If I can get this car, it'll be exciting. If I can achieve that position in a company, I'm all set for life. If I can start this business, I'll be the happiest person. You always hear that. And as much as we say things to come and things to enjoy and things to look forward to that will bring us happiness, we also say, if I didn't, I wish I didn't, not study. I wish I didn't work hard to get into this school. I wish I didn't mess up this relationship. I wish I didn't, have that kind of very tough relationship with my parents. I wish I didn't, and I wish I didn't. So we either go back and regret and be depressed about it, or we look forward to sources of happiness that we know even from our experiences, that things we thought will make us the happiest evaporated, like St. James said. It appears for a little and then it goes away. And I think this is really the gist of our talk this morning. It's about inner and outer happiness and joy. And I want to differentiate, and I think some of you, I want to be honest, very intimidated by the group because of, you said everything I want to say last night. Literally everything I wanted to say, and it's not intimidated, it's like, I feel bad because I have nothing to offer. Not because it's, if anything, it just, you said everything that I wanted to share, and maybe more eloquently and more articulately. And you know that inner peace and inner joy surpasses all happiness on the outside. You know that joy is different than happiness. You know that being a thermometer is different than being the thermostat. Changing the environment around you with the work of the Holy Spirit that's inside of you. But I also know that we're ambivalent about suffering. And I heard that very clearly yesterday. Yesterday there was that, Tabiani, if the Holy Spirit will give me that joy, can I suffer? Why would I suffer? And this kind of paradox, very similar to the cross. You have Saint Mary crying, people mocking, disciples running away, and Jesus saying, forgive them. They have no idea what they're doing. It's that paradox. So how can we live in a life where we are supposed to live joyfully, but in the meantime go through pain and suffering? How can the two be weaved together? And there is, I think, the one book in the Bible that can put this together, it's Philippians. Those 4 small chapters in the epistle of St. Paul to the Philippians. Because in the midst of his suffering, and in the midst of his jail time that might be ending up with a martyrdom, he is so joyful that someone get to meet Christ. And the people of Philippi, the Philippians, in the midst of their persecution, by the way, they were not like all set khalas, they know Christ. They were getting persecuted. They're thinking about St. Paul on the other side. They're thinking about his needs for his ministry. They're sending him help. They're sending him one to check on him. You see how it's working? And that's the joy of the Holy Spirit. That's the joy of the Holy Spirit. And it comes right after love. And this is from Galatians 5. And it's the fruit of the Holy Spirit. It's the joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. That's what we need. That's what we need to live on this earth and to be able to be Christ-like. We need His Holy Spirit. We need His Holy Spirit. But first, let's get the worldly kind of standards and definition of joy. According to the, Webster Dictionary, that's the definition of joy. It's a condition or feeling of high pleasure or delight, happiness or gladness. Very simple. But Harry Nguyen, the Christian writer, says that joy does not simply happen to us. It doesn't just happen to us automatically. It's something that we have to choose and we have to seek. And we have to keep choosing every day. How can that be? If the Holy Spirit inside of me and the Holy Spirit produces that joy, then why should I seek it? Why I'm not happy all the time? Well, why we pray every day? If I have Christ, why we came for communion? Why don't we just have communion once and for all? Why do we stand? Why do we do matanyas? Why do we cry? Why do we have to keep washing? It's renewable. It's renewable. It's a living water. You need to keep drinking from it. And we seek joy in every aspect in our life. In our interactions, in our behavior, responses to people, the choices we make, the dreams we have, even in our prayers, we seek joy. In our communication with God, and in our communion with God and our brothers and sisters, we seek joy. And I think I meant it today when I said that this is the peak of our joy today. This is the peak of the joy of this retreat. To be all of us together in Christ, in unity, there is nothing that can surpass that. Nothing can compete with that. Yesterday, those who attended the midnight praise, there is a joy about singing. There is a joy almost of heavenly joy when we stand and we sing. Even when you're tired and like almost kind of nodding and sleeping, there is still your soul is being lifted up. Your soul is being lifted up. How we resolve that conflict between the inner and outer joy? We were created after whose image? God's image, right? We're created after His image and His likeness. To fulfill this image, to satisfy this image, you need what? Can you get earthly stuff and fill it up? What's going to happen? What happened to the Samaritan woman? What happened to anyone who lived in sin out of pleasure? We keep going for it, and we enjoy momentarily, but then we get hungry, / shameful. We go back again. Even the legitimate joy, the happiness of the world, the legitimate ones that you work hard, you achieve, you build, at the end of the day, still was not cutting it for this guy or for any of us. And I think we can empathize with him, even though we have an edge because we get to experience that joy from the inside. Sometimes we might miss it and not find it, or it's not very clear in front of us, but sometimes we really can tap into it. So, being on the image of God, we're gods. The Bible said that we're gods. We're the Son of the Most High. We're the Son of the Most High. He's the infinite God. God meant the source of happiness to come and joy to come from within, not from outside. For one reason, if your source and my source of happiness always come from the outside, then I'm going to be like the beggar who's always stretching their hands, waiting to be given. I'm going to be in a cage like an animal, and I'm waiting to be fed. Always deprived, always in need, always waiting. The problem, all the stuff that come to me from the outside are earthly stuff. It's not gonna fulfill something that's divine. My spirit is divine. My being is divine. When you read in the book of Genesis, chronologically from the creation, it starts, who's the first person that starts with? Who's the first name? Who? Is it Adam, Sheath, or Seth? Does it start with that? It starts with God began Adam, all the way to Jesus. And you read again in the New Testament, but it goes from Jesus all the way to Adam and God. But when we live in the world, we look like Cain and his children. And he starts by Cain, and then he goes through the names of Cain. And anyone that does not live that Alpha and Omega life, does not live with God, kind of cast away from that genealogy of God and his children and daughters to genealogy of the devil. Even now the messages of positive, and you hear a lot, and again, I'm not, my profession before priesthood was counseling and therapy and all of that. So I'm not against coaching and against positive attitude and positive psychology and motivational speak. I'm not against these things. I'm just against if this is the only remedy for us, we will feel temporarily okay, and then when everybody else leaves, we crash. We crash. So even in some churches now, the way to evangelize, it's a message of prosperity. You hear in the churches, sometimes even more in the South on the Bible Belt, it's all about prosperity. It's all about doing well in life and achieving and building and accumulating and all of that. People have a hard time getting in touch with the spiritual world that this professor was talking about. They cannot see. The curtains are closed. The curtains are closed. So the only thing they can see what? Just let's make it work here. Let's just bring some prosperity. The problem when that is not cutting it, what happens? We go to other means. We cannot. There's something still missing. So we go to other means of, okay, let me find some joy. Whether it's gambling, drinking. This is the old style. This is a piece of cake now. This is nothing in comparison to what's happening now. Huh? Cupcake. Yes, that's nothing. We give cupcake in Sunday school. That's nothing. And what happens is that immediate gratification, the immediate happiness that we all look for, feels good, but it doesn't last. It disappears, it evaporates. Solomon said it. If any man was richer than him, had more fame than him, he had all the pleasures in life. He had wives, he had slaves, he had gardens, he had everything that anybody on earth can imagine. And on top of that, he had wisdom from above. God gave him wisdom. And Solomon would come with semi-depressive, but at the end of the book of Ecclesiastes, you can see that he's seeing the light. The curtains are opening. And he would tell you that vanity of all vanities are vanity. Everything is gone. Everything is going to disappear. But sometimes those addictive qualities and some of that control that we seek, whether control over relationships or control at work or control in my household or with my friends, it's like kind of two sides of one coin. And God wants us to deal with this joy from satisfaction to joy, not from hunger to joy. I'll just put some pictures of things that we think momentarily, and I know if everyone were to refocus and list the standards, he will find things that keep us going and keep us distracted, fragmented, and it takes away our joy. We have no time to focus. We have no time to sit with ourselves, recalculate what's happening in our lives. And with everything, and again, internet, media, social media has so many amazing qualities. These are things that we can use. But how we're using them, how we're using can be a problem. The binging, it's a bit binging is a term that's famous with eating disorder, bulimia, but the binging in social media right now and YouTube videos, even if it's legitimate stuff. I barely go on Facebook, and I only get Facebook a year after priesthood because everybody told me you're crazy not to have it because this is a way to connect. And every maybe week or so, or when I go and check, I like short videos on animals, you know? You get the gist. And I enjoy it, nature, and I used to really love it when I was young. كان في مصر something called عالم الحيوان. You might not, none of you, it's maybe Dr. Samir remembers it very well. Yeah. And I would watch it. And then I would be going on something for, posting something for the church or doing something for a meeting or a youth gathering or whatever. And I end up seeing kind of a small video, and I watch it, and then before it ends, the next one starts, and then the following one starts, and then I look and I realize that for 2 hours, I've done nothing but watching. I don't want to say dumb videos because they're not dumb, but dumb me allowing this to happen. You're not recording, right? Should not. And this is legitimate. This is kind of, I'm not going to go confess. Actually, I should. Here, when a public confession. San Augustine, 101, 102. I wasted 2 hours, but I wonder people addicted to pornography. What happens? Imagine the stimulation from something innocent that makes you want to watch can take that much time from you. How about something that can bring pleasure, make all the circuits in your brain fire up, the serotonin and, endorphin like kicking in, and you're just, there is a rush. And it goes up, and then you crash, and you find yourself depressed. Or going for a drink that becomes 20 drinks, and then going from a place to a place. What happened? Aimlessly walking, looking for joy. I think I confessed about the Facebook, but another confession is about Netflix. I cancel Netflix. And I used to have, I'm just going to tell you, I didn't verify, but I wouldn't be too surprised. This is only till 2016. They had about 93 million subscribers. In 1 week, 1 billion hours of content was running. عارفين يعني 1 billion? Only on Netflix. Only on Netflix. How many other forums that we can watch and see and go on and on and on and on. And some of it are good shows, some of it, even I had a Christian list, I had things that I can share with, high school, even though those are disappearing now from Netflix. That's why I canceled it. My list that are like we're slimming, they were taking out all the good kind of like good message movies and shows. Still very, very few. But what it's doing to me, it's robbing me. It's robbing me from a time where I can be looking for a true joy, not happiness, not escape. I don't mind coming back from work and relaxing and sitting on the couch and watching something and just kind of, but if I go, I have husbands that go into the basement after a long day of work, and their only way of decompressing is they watch soccer. We're not talking pornography, just soccer. One game after a game, summary, they are following the La Liga and the English, league, and what happened to the family? What happened to the kids? What happened to their wives? Some wives are so concerned about who did what and went where and wearing what and what kind of vacation and how can I just post something so we can, and I know Facebook now, this is for the 60 and above. I know you have like a totally different league with Snapchat and Instagram. But it's competing, thinking that getting a comment or a like or a view or how many hits can help. There is some chemicals that work in the brain when you see that amount of likes or the amount of sharing, or when you share something. Studies that tells us that the brain is really getting some gratification, but it's all a trap. All of it is a trap if you don't know what you're doing. If you're not careful enough, it's a trap. Because there is a verse in Ecclesiastes 3:11, it says this: He has made everything beautiful. I really love this verse. He has made everything beautiful. When? Can you tell me? In what? In its time. So there is a season for everything. Everything beautiful, but only in its time. Marriage and intimacy, relationship, they're beautiful in its time. But the more important thing, He put something in our hearts. What did He put? God? What did He put? Eternity. So if there is eternity in this heart, if He put eternity in this heart, can anything fill this heart? Trust me, you can be the most accomplished person in this world. And if there is no eternity, you're not filling, you're not building towards that eternity that He put in your heart has a huge hole. And everything you put inside goes out. Just as Jesus told the Samaritan woman. He told her, I'm going to give you the living water. You're not going to thirst again. The Word of God is a living water. These are some quotes from some famous people in the 17th, 18th century. You might know some of them, but it's really not important who's the person. But the first one was one of the most, Voltaire. He was a politician, poet. He was very rich. He got into the Swiss watch business, and he was very opposed to the Church and Christ. In his time, that was kind of in Europe was very conservative, actually, compared to now. And he said, I wish I had never been born. He was one of the richest people in France. By the way, by scamming the lottery. He got with a mathematician and they know how to, get it. Repeatedly, by the way. I don't know how. The guy, his name is in England, Lord Byron. You know, he's the one who wrote Don Juan in Egypt. They say, سمعتوا كلمة دون جوان الولد ده عامل دون جوان. You heard that word? So Don Juan is that famous novel that he wrote. He was according to his time, he was the total player in terms of pleasure and relationships and with different people. At the end, he said, the worm, the canker, those sores, and grief are mine alone. Jay Gould, he's an American millionaire. He started the railroad of his time, and he's one of the richest people in America. He said, I suppose I'm the most miserable man on earth. I don't think I'm telling you anything that you don't know, that fame, money, beauty doesn't bring that joy. Lord Beaconsfield, that's a guy who served 2 terms as the prime minister, and he's the one who started the Conservative Party in England. He was one of the most decorated politicians of his time. He said, it's amazing, youth is a mistake. He reminds me of Solomon. Manhood is a struggle and old age is a regret. That's tough. After you became one of the most, like the diplomat, the politician of his time, to feel that way about your whole entire life, and God made you beautiful. Alexander the Great, after he conquered everywhere, he said there is no more to conquer, no more countries, no more land. He wants more. There is nothing. Nothing is filling. Nothing is filling. But there is only one that can fill our hearts, and it's Jesus Christ. And the joy that the Holy Spirit gives, nobody can take away. Even if you are in the poorest country on earth, even if you're the most less fortunate person on earth, even if you have no limbs, even if you have no one, and He's inside, there is joy. Suffering, yes, but there is joy. And I think that's why we hear more when Christ is fading away from some parts in the world. I know He's in some other parts, the missionary work and the evangelism is really working, and people are seeing, and glory be to Him, His name is being revealed. But we're struggling in a time and I think our country in the direction we're going, where any message, any talk about God is being attacked. And that's why I think we see a lot of suicides. I don't know if you follow the news, but it's the ultimate giving up. And usually people who suicide, again, this is without stereotyping, are people who are very well off. People are celebrities, or whether, politicians. If you can just Google or search the last 50, 100 celebrities that committed suicide. And for every suicide, there's 10 celebrities who attempted suicide. To every completed or successful suicide, they say, there is about 10. Why? Why would someone who's winning an Oscar and has all the fame and prestige take his own life? Why someone like Kate Spade that started a very, very successful company and was booming. And I know there is, and again, I don't want to mix things, there might be mental illness and disorders, but I'm talking about people who are well but not happy. I'm not talking about people who are sick, because there are sick people, and sometimes that leads to suicide. But there are people who are wealthy and famous and rich and accomplish everything they can accomplish, and they still take their lives. What is missing? What's missing? That nothing is filling the inside. Nothing is filling the inside. And St. Paul in Philippians, he said, But even if I am being poured out as a drink offering upon the sacrifice and service of your faith, means I'm being khalas emptied. There is nothing left in me. He's saying that to the Philippian. I rejoice and share my joy. I rejoice and share my joy. I told you there's about 16 times St. Paul repeats the word joy and rejoice with all. You too, I urge you, rejoice in the same way. What way? So how can we rejoice? What same way? That we need to pour ourselves out for Christ. That man that I showed you his video, since 29, he's going around the world, he's evangelizing. He left everything, he quit everything. And again, I'm not asking you to go and just send a resignation letter to your boss. When هتلاقي many servants waiting in the church. But I'm saying, are you pouring yourself out to people around you? Are we showing Christ? Not even by preaching. Let's say that preaching can be sometimes now politically incorrect, even though hopefully we can pass that level. Can we show through our actions? He said that they might see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. That you're the salt. Your company and the place that you work in, it's a big meal and you are just this little salt. And it takes just a little salt to make it a seasoned meal, a tasty one. You're the light. So he said, and I urge you, rejoice in the same way. You cannot rejoice in just taking. You cannot rejoice in just accumulating. You have to rejoice in pouring yourself for Christ. You want inner joy? You want inner joy? That's how inner joy can happen. Remember incidents in your life when you truly served someone and helped someone and how it felt to you. Remember more that you served someone in the name of Christ. A child in a Sunday school, a family, a parent, a mom, your own family, and how it felt. Imagine if you're doing that. But we cannot really say that I'm done, right? I'm almost done. We cannot say that we are the one who's going to offer. It's God who works through us. If we have Him, He works through us. He's the one that worked in you both to will and to do. Just let Him. Let His will make you do the work. Let His hands move your hands and do the work. I'm just going to skip. This is maybe the last one. If we wait till sadness, depression, failure, anger, failing relationships, making miserable mistakes, whether career or relationship, if we wait for those things to disappear so we can start to have joy, I have to give you the bad news, this will not happen. You will go, someone asked yesterday about tribulation and suffering. It's guaranteed, it's promised, we will have to have. The path is narrow. We have to go through the suffering. But can we rejoice? Can we be joyful during that suffering? Examples in the Bible, maybe we can talk about when we talk about the purity of heart. May God give us the true joy that coming from His Holy Spirit. Please pray for one another, pray for us, and glory be to God forever. Amen.
Whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, Think about such things. Think about such things.